Can I begin by acknowledging some of my federal colleagues, Senator Anne McEwen and Senator Sean Edwards, as well as the member for Hindmarsh, Matt Williams. Can I also acknowledge Mr Paul McClintock, National Chairman of CEDA, who I've also known in a former capacity when he headed up the COAG Reform Council. And can I acknowledge the Honourable Stephen Martin, Chief Executive of CEDA, and Stephen is a regular in South Australia and has given me the opportunity in South Australia to use CEDA as a forum for a number of very important announcements, and we're very grateful for Stephen and indeed CEDA for not only offering me the opportunity in South Australia but also on this occasion to say a few words to you. And can I also acknowledge Miriam, who is a wonderful public servant back in South Australia in our TAFE system. Well, I must begin by saying that I think you've chosen the wrong after-dinner speaker. I understand that you had Clive Palmer earlier today. Would have been a much better choice. Clive, actually, in a real sense, Clive might have been here as Premier of South Australia. Little known fact, Clive came to South Australia in the 70s, got involved in the local Liberal Party, and it was about the time of a massive split in the Liberal Party in South Australia from which they've never recovered. So I don't know what that says about Clive, but he could very well have been the Premier of South Australia, and he could have been here giving this speech in an entirely different capacity. So I'd ask you just to dwell on that for a few moments. But actually, I do like Clive. My favourite Clive moment was when he pulled up the front of Parliament House in his Rolls Royce and lectured all of the politicians and said, look, everybody should drive their own car. They shouldn't have a publicly provided car. Oh, it was absolutely magnificent. But you've got me. But look, I do want to congratulate those CEDA on the choice of the topic. I think this is the question. The question that you've identified, new economy, old economy, is the question on the minds of certainly the citizens of South Australia, and I would argue the citizens of this whole country. There is an enormous sense of uncertainty about our future. People are wondering where the next jobs will come from for themselves and their families and their kids. And nobody has been able to supply a very persuasive answer to that question. And unless we can supply an answer to that question, we're going to have, I think, a country which feels like it suffers from a lack of leadership. So I think you have chosen precisely the right issue. And it's not an imperative that's on the horizon, it's actually right here, right now. I just want to talk about the last couple of weeks and the way we've experienced them in South Australia to give you some idea of the sense of urgency and the significance of the changes that are actually upon us. We must understand these future effects and the role they're playing on our economy. And just to pick one particular influence which is playing itself out at the moment, it's the question of climate change. The Vatican, not traditionally known as one of the most progressive organisations on the planet, criticised climate change deniers and warned of the unprecedented destruction of the ecosystem. Europe's top oil and gas companies urged governments to introduce a pricing system on carbon. The G7 pledged to phase out fossil fuels by the end of the century. All in the space of the last 2 weeks. And in my state, about 11 days ago, Alinta Energy said it would close the Port Augusta power station and the associated Lee Creek coal mine. Now, the significance of this for my state is difficult to underestimate. It's really the Playford settlement. A former Premier of South Australia, Sir Thomas Playford, really built the industrial architecture of South Australia on the basis of cheap power, cheap water, cheap land, cheap labour, behind large tariff walls. This was the Playford settlement for South Australia. It meant that we had the largest proportion of our economy devoted to manufacturing anywhere in the nation, still, up until very recently, the largest sector by value in our economy. And so that power station, the 400 jobs with it, goes. And of course, just to top it off, last week we had the news of South Australia having the highest unemployment rate in the country, 7.6% in May. So you can imagine it wasn't a great week last week. So my point is that these changes are affecting the whole nation, but they're impacting on South Australia in a particular way, earlier perhaps than others, more deeply perhaps than others, but certainly this is the challenge that's affecting the whole of our country. You would have recalled the closure of Holden's Elizabeth plant in 2017, the foreshadowed closure in 2017, which just is another example of the economy of South Australia in transition. So what we have is traditional industries declining, but at the same time as this extraordinary shock that we're seeing in the South Australian economy, we're also seeing extraordinary, exciting and positive change. On the very day that the Trade Ministers officially signed the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, a new company was established essentially in South Australia called Beston Global Food. It's a South Australian company, and on that day it reopened two closed dairy processing plants which had lost 200 jobs. So it was a very important announcement from that perspective, but the element of it that was most important was that this company had created a new business model. It had actually created a business model drawing on about 40 years of relationships that the principal of the company, Dr. Roger Sexton, had established to have a distribution outlet across the whole of Asia and into the Middle East. It also involved the purchasing of a range of factories, of processing companies, and also then the purchasing of farms, so primary production activities. It also produced a number of much-loved South Australian brands, Ferguson Seafoods and Paris Creek Yogurt, and sought to take what were relatively small companies and scale them up into large global players. This business model innovation, the extension from distribution networks to value adding and then back to the farm gate, is a new model and has attracted extraordinary investment, and the ambitions for this company to grow are really quite phenomenal. It pledges to reopen the factory that was closed, that's a couple of hundred jobs, and double that within the next couple of months. And its particular focus is not just food, but food which has a particular warrant of integrity, which is so critical in the Asia-Pacific region, but also food which has health elements. It's the coming together of food and pharmaceuticals and health products all within one company, trading on South Australia's particular strengths as being pest-free, pesticide-free, and largely protected through its natural circumstances from many of the diseases that have emerged in other places around the nation, but also around the world. So, and in the same place where these power stations were shut down, we also saw something else exciting. We saw a farm called Sundrop's Farm, which used a desalination technology, which essentially takes the salt water from the Port Augusta Gulf, desalinates it, captures the waste energy, and uses that to warm the greenhouses at night. And it has created a farm with about 200 workers. It's about to double its size and has a massive contract with one of the large retailers in South Australia, and indeed plans to expand extraordinarily, something like 400 jobs in the Port Augusta region. And then just down the road in Port Augusta, we have a very exciting idea which has not yet been landed, but which is for a solar thermal plant. So a solar thermal plant using the technologies associated with the space stations to actually use mirrors which move around incrementally as the sunlight moves to concentrate sunlight using a molten sodium technology which promises to create baseload power which can then be distributed into the network, the very same network that was used by the Port Augusta power station. So on the same week that we have this extraordinary destruction, we have this incredible creation, all in the same place. and really about the same issue, climate change. So this is the circumstance that South Australians are grappling with. Now, we've been grappling, obviously last week was a spectacular week, but we've been grappling with this general idea of destruction and change and the transformation of the South Australian economy for some time. And there are two ways in which you can grapple with what appears to be the rapidly changing world around us. One is you can burst into tears and cry into your Cooper's beer, or the others, you could take it on and actually choose to win. And this is the approach that we've chosen to take for our state. We believe that applying ourselves creatively to the challenges that meet us and actually coming up with a plan to meet them and taking the risks necessary to meet them is the way in which we will conquer these changes. And I want to stay on the theme of climate change because in that area, we have seen the opportunity to be a first mover, and as a consequence, we've played host to a huge increase in clean tech industries. Just consider this, renewables now account for 39% of our electricity generation, which is way ahead of the original target of 20% we set for ourselves. We now have in South Australia the highest rate of solar penetration per capita of any country in the world. We have the second highest rate of wind farm penetration per capita than any country in the world. Companies like Zen Energy are on the cusp of unlocking battery technology, creating one of the most exciting clean tech sectors anywhere in the world. And our next step is to make Adelaide a carbon neutral city. This will involve making electric and hybrid vehicles the preferred mode of transport in the CBD, creating more green spaces, building walls that reduce heat and improve energy efficiency, converting our public transport fleet to renewable energy, and supporting companies who are seeking to develop new technologies. Put simply, an Adelaide green zone surrounded by that green curtain around our parklands will allow us to present this attractive proposition not just to Australia but to the world. And that proposition is this: if you set up in Adelaide, you will have the lowest carbon footprint of anywhere in the world. And perhaps most importantly, it will project an image of our state of being not only a state that has that ethical goal at its heart, but also has the ambition to achieve it through the technological change and the businesses that will develop those technological changes. So that's the way we're confronting change. We're meeting it head on and seizing it as an opportunity, not as something that's going to break us down. Now, some of you might have heard speculation that I was not meant to be here in the relevant sense of the word. I was not meant to win the March 2014 election. In fact, almost every political commentator said that we'd be obliterated at the last election. But after that election, we decided we'd get to work, and we decided to operate on the same premise that I believe won us the election. That is, that we wanted for South Australia the choice we made as a Labor Party in South Australia. That is, we wanted to choose to win rather than to lose. So we set about critically assessing our state's strengths and our weaknesses, and we outlined a bold vision, essentially a value proposition that we wanted to take to the world. We know that we are a place where everybody regards us a great place to bring up kids, one of the great places in the world to live. We wanted to add to that the sort of excitement that meant you'd want to set up a business there as well. We engaged with thousands of South Australians to create an economic plan, a list of 10 economic priorities to help us realise that vision. And we chose those sectors of the economy that we could see, based on the best advice that we could gain, would be the fastest growing sectors of the South Australian, indeed the Australian economy. And besides the renewable and energy and mineral resources I've discussed, we chose premium food and wine, health industries, and also establishing ourselves as a student and tourist destination of choice. And consistent with our state's logo, we wanted to present to the world an open and outward-looking orientation. We established an inbound investment agency based on the renowned Irish and Singaporean models that will take advantage of the free trade agreements being signed and take our products and opportunities to the world. We've invested in research centres and education to attract businesses to our state. Hewlett-Packard and Oz Minerals have recently established their offices in South Australia. We've also investing in our key economic asset, our City of Adelaide. We've massively upgraded our Adelaide Oval, and anyone who's been to an AFL match at Adelaide Oval in the past year will tell you what a buzz it's created. It's utterly transformed the winter economy of the City of Adelaide. We've rebuilt our Adelaide Convention Centre. We're building a brand new Royal Adelaide Hospital, the largest building, public or private, anywhere in Australia. And the new South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute, housed in one of the most architecturally striking buildings that's been built anywhere in this nation in the last decade, is attracting world-leading experts. So the redevelopment of that entire precinct around the River Torrens is transforming Adelaide and the way people in South Australia are seeing our city and our state. We fundamentally believe that regions compete on the attractiveness of their capital cities, especially in the crowded world of images where everybody is trying to vie for attention and preference. And in the post-GFC environment, we made a decision to keep ploughing ahead with that infrastructure investment and deliberately sacrificed our AAA credit rating to make sure that we could keep those investments on track. Instead of permitting expenditure to chase down revenue, we chose to build infrastructure. And now we're seeing the response from private sector partners. 4 new hotels built, another 4 about to be built, and each of the local universities have made corresponding investments alongside our new hospital in what will be one of the nation's great biomedical precincts. The tech company Cisco has named Adelaide as one of its first lighthouse city in Australia, which brings us into Cisco's international network of cities connecting computer devices to the internet. And a number of Adelaide companies have taken part in ANZ's Innovise Start Accelerator entrepreneurial program. We've seen a plethora of innovative hubs grow up around the city at the same time as the excitement and buzz of the city has changed. So now we move into the next phase of our economic transformation, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we did last Thursday, which was our state budget. In that budget, we decided to pursue this notion of movement from the old economy to the new economy. What does that involve? Well, it involves businesses changing their business models, new equipment, acquiring other businesses, rationalising how and what they do, essentially asking businesses to step up and move from the old economy to the new economy. No more significant an industry to do this in than in the car industry. A car industry that has many magnificent manufacturers that have been supplying to that car industry, but who now have to find a new reason for existence. So in this budget, the heart of the budget is tax reform, a topic that I know many governments have ducked. Our package of tax reforms arose from a brief but searching state-wide review, and easily the most comprehensively in the history of our state and in recent memory in the nation. It began somewhat courageously in Sir Humphrey Appley's terms, without a predicted outcome, and creates a new tax system, one that rewards effort, removes barriers from those people who do want to change their businesses. Essentially what we've done is get rid of transactional taxes for businesses. So the headline elements of the tax changes are these. 5 taxes will be abolished, including some on budget day. Stamp duty on share transfers ended immediately last week. Stamp duty on non-residential real property transfers will be phased out. We'll be the only state that does not charge this levy. A total of $670 million in tax reductions will be provided over the next 4 years. This is off a budget of about $17 billion. There'll be ongoing reductions worth more than $268 million a year from 18-19. We also continue a payroll tax rebate that gives us the lowest payroll tax regime in the nation. And this also coincides with changes to our workers' compensation arrangements, which will save employers close to $180 million per year in South Australia. So once our changes are fully implemented, a business could save $364,000 in its first year of operation. This is unashamedly an attempt to provide a competitive advantage for South Australian business, those who want to change, and attract others who want to come to South Australia and be part of the new economy. I just want to have a word about national taxation reform, because part of the motivation, apart from its own intrinsic importance for South Australia, was to set ourselves up so that when we approach the national tax reform debate, we can do it with clean hands. Joe Hockey said, get your own house in order. Well, we have. And so we have approached the white paper process on taxation reform in that spirit. Certain state taxes, such as payroll taxes, are, in the parlance of these things, relatively more efficient than some of the transaction taxes that I've just spoken about. But the way they're implemented across the nation leads to inefficiencies, different thresholds, different rates, and for national companies working across boundaries, a nightmare of red tape. Our proposition is there should be a national payroll tax regime, or if you follow Ken Henry's advice, a national turnover tax, which could be administered by the Commonwealth and sent back to the states. We also think that Australia as a whole should look at how we best regulate online gambling, not only to deal with its social harms, but also to see the taxation leakage from those arrangements, which could also benefit the revenue base of our nation. And you would also be aware that no discussion of national taxation reform is complete without a discussion of GST. You recall what happened in not the last budget, but the budget before last. The Commonwealth cut $80 billion from revenues from the states and territories without notice, in breach of agreements, and then essentially, with a bit of a smirk on the face, said, oh, maybe you'd like to ask for a GST. Now, all the states and territories said, no, we're not interested in doing that. And hopefully we've put that debate back on a proper footing with the upcoming retreat. But I want to explain South Australia's position in relation to the GST. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction to not want to increase the GST or apply it to fresh fruit or education or any of the other, or health, or any of the other broadening factors that have been suggested. We're opposed to it because such changes are regressive and hit low-income earners the hardest. Today I released some research from NatSem at the University of Canberra that shows, not unsurprisingly, that low-income households spend proportionally more on basics such as food than higher-income households. So if you broaden the base in the way that's been suggested, it would lift the share of GST expenditure by almost double that for low-income earners of high-income groups. That's not to say that that's the end of the discussion about GST. There is a sensible set of reforms about GST which are not regressive, and that includes the application of GST to financial services. Such a move could yield $3.6 billion per year, which is a fair chunk of the $8 billion per year, which has been cut from the states and territories. Money that could help fund the national reform effort and would make an important contribution. And importantly, it is not regressive, it is mildly progressive. The other thing I want to say about taxation reform is that it shouldn't be considered in isolation from the way the Federation operates. I mentioned before the retreat. We do welcome the Prime Minister's decision to engage in a retreat. I think this retreat has real opportunities for us to have some breakthrough decisions in relation to the Federation. It's neatly balanced, 4 Labor, 4 Liberal and 1 Prime Minister. And there are no elections in the offing, so there's no reason for people to be scared. And we're certainly working very hard on a series of productivity reforms that will take to that gathering, and I intend to outline them in detail at the National Press Club, which I've been invited to address on the 8th of July. We in the states are ready for substantial reform of the Federation, provided it's fair, provided it's substantial, and I think the imperatives of the day this shift from the old to the new economy and the uncertainties that many people in our community, I think, are feeling, demand that we do this. There is a massive sense of an absence of leadership in our nation, and I think a massive permission for bold steps to be taken on behalf of the community to grapple with the size of the change that is being experienced by us. And I just give one example. Whenever in the lead up to the election I thought I was doing something which was a reform measure that would make a positive contribution, the overwhelming sense that we had from the community is, that's great, what's next? Anything that doesn't look like it is substantial or bold is being marked down by the community because they understand the size of the challenge in front of us. They know what's happening to this economy. They can see a new economy. They can see an old economy crumbling. But what they see is a timid response from our nation's leaders in the face of that. That's why I think that when bold ideas are promoted, like some of the ideas we've promoted today about abolishing transaction taxes, there is an above average amount of attention about them in the nation because people are crying out for change which looks like it's meeting the size of the challenge in front of us. So we're not waiting for the world. We know that the world doesn't owe us a living. We know that certainly the nation doesn't seem to be very keen on providing us a living any longer, with the car industry no longer being subsidised, the defence industry being uncertainty there, renewable energy even, uncertainty being created there. So we don't think we can rely upon others. We are trying to create our own future. That's why we're making the changes that we're making. And we invite anybody that wants to be part of this story in South Australia to actually come and talk to us about that. You will have access to decision makers. You'll have access to our policy and regulatory support. You'll have access to the resources of our state if you can pitch into our economic plan for South Australia, which is at its heart the shifting of South Australia from the old to the new economy. Thank you.